Isaac Moreno arrived at Twin Pines Ranch with more baggage than the duffel in his trunk. The open Wyoming landscape felt alien, too vast, too quiet, like a canvas waiting to swallow him whole. He wasn't just here for a graduate assignment. He was running from a newsroom scandal, a broken engagement, and a reputation in Manhattan journalism that had gone from promising to radioactive in a matter of weeks. He told himself this was penance, humility through immersion. But the moment he stepped out of his rental and onto the gravel lot, his polished boots met the skeptical eyes of Luke Carver. The ranch foreman stood with arms crossed, sun-worn and unreadable. The kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from the land itself. Isaac, with his too clean flannel and metropolitan posture, felt instantly transparent. Another tourist with a notepad. Luke muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Isaac to hear. Yet beneath the gruff exterior was something else, an almost imperceptible flicker of curiosity. Isaac noted it, filed it away like a good reporter would. What he didn't realize then was this assignment wouldn't just reshape his career, it would challenge everything he thought he knew about desire, truth, and belonging. Isaac quickly learned that the silence of the ranch wasn't empty. It was layered. It hummed with the low rustle of wind through grass, the distant bawl of cattle, the creak of saddles and wood. And beneath it all, there was Luke Carver's gaze, steady, unreadable, always just out of reach. Their first encounters were anything but smooth. Isaac, still shedding his city shell, asked too many questions, took too many notes, moved too slowly for the rhythm of the ranch. Luke responded with clipped instructions and long silences, his drawl as sparse as the landscape. Yet, despite the frost between them, something flared just beneath the surface. Every time their eyes met across the corral or over dinner with the crew, it lingered a moment too long. A tension, taut and flickering, neither of them acknowledged. Luke moved with an ease that fascinated Isaac, muscles coiled with function, not vanity. His hands were always busy, wrapping reins, mending gear, brushing dust from a mare's flank. And Isaac couldn't help watching. He hated how obvious he felt under Luke's scrutiny, yet he kept gravitating toward it like metal to a magnet. The days passed in a quiet push-pull of effort and resistance. But each shared task, each gate opened together, each fence post-driven, chipped away at the wall between them. By the end of that first week, Isaac still didn't understand Luke, but he felt him, in the dust clinging to his clothes, in the way his chest tightened when Luke's voice came low and close behind him. The storm came in fast, a bruised sky rolling over the plains with a force that felt almost cinematic to Isaac, until it became terrifyingly real. Luke had taken him out that afternoon to check a distant fence line, and they were halfway back when the wind shifted and the air turned electric. Lightning cracked like a whip across the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the bones of the earth. Rain came next, sheets of it, obliterating the trail and forcing them to take shelter in the cab of Luke's battered old pickup. Inside, the silence was louder than the storm. The windows fogged quickly, their breathing the only sound between thunderclaps. Isaac sat with soaked jeans clinging to his legs, heart racing, not from the weather, but from Luke sitting so close. The scent of leather and damp flannel thick in the narrow space. He risked a glance. Luke was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, fingers tapping the steering wheel like a fuse burning down. "I don't think this storm's going anywhere," Isaac said, voice low. Luke turned to him, eyes dark, unreadable. "Neither are you." The air between them crackled. Then, without warning, Luke reached across the seat and pulled Isaac in, their mouths colliding in a kiss that was sharp with urgency and too long in the making. It was rough, imperfect, and utterly real. When they broke apart, breathless, they didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The storm was inside now, and neither of them wanted to outrun it. The aftermath hit like a second storm, quieter, but no less disorienting. The kiss had been heat and hunger, a release of something neither of them had been willing to name. But when the rain stopped and the sky cracked open with morning light, Luke shifted back into silence. He drove them home without a word, his jaw clenched, his hands locked tight on the wheel. Isaac sat beside him, replaying the moment over and over, trying to find the line where want had become action and where it had started to feel like something more. Back at the ranch, Luke barely looked at him. He barked orders during the morning feed like nothing had happened, retreating into his usual rhythm with a kind of practiced cruelty. Isaac tried to keep up, try not to let the ache show, But it was there in the way his hands trembled over buckles and halters, in the way he lingered too long beside empty stalls. Later that day, tension finally snapped. They were in the tack room, the only light filtering in through slatted wood, when Isaac confronted him. "You can't pretend it didn't happen," he said, voice tight. Luke turned slowly, eyes narrowed. "I'm not pretending. I'm trying to forget." "That's not the same thing," Isaac whispered. Another silence. Then Luke stepped forward, crowding the space between them. "You think I haven't wanted this? I don't still want it." This kiss was different, slower, like an apology, like a promise they were both terrified to make. The following days were a blur of work and silence, tension crackling beneath every exchange. Luke kept his distance, physically, emotionally, retreating behind his routine like it was armor. But Isaac could feel the weight of something unspoken in every look that passed between them. It wasn't just about the kiss. It was about what came with it. Years of silence Luke had wrapped around himself like a second skin, and the fear that this, whatever this was, would unravel it all. One evening, after the sun had sunk into the horizon and the sky blazed with bruised lavender, Isaac found himself in the barn loft, reading through his notes. The article he'd come here to write felt distant now. Hollow. The story he was living had become far more compelling and far more dangerous. Luke found him there, boots on the ladder like thunder on wood. "You've been asking a lot of questions," he said, voice low. "Want to know mine?" Isaac looked up, heart already racing. "What's stopping you?" Luke exhaled slowly, stepping into the light. "A man I trusted once turned me into a secret. Thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep my life. Turns out, silence is its own kind of loss." Isaac closed his notebook. "I'm not here to make you a secret." For the first time, Luke sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, breath shallow. "Good," he murmured, "because I don't think I could survive that again." They didn't kiss this time. They just sat there, closer than before, no longer pretending they weren't falling. The story was never supposed to leak. Isaac had shared an early draft with a classmate back in New York, a trusted peer, someone who'd sworn discretion. But the moment it landed on a faculty listserv, excerpts took on a life of their own. Within days, headlines began surfacing on niche journalism blogs. City writer embeds on ranch and finds more than cattle. Names weren't used, but it wasn't hard to trace the lines. The combination of vivid imagery, a stormy kiss in a barn, and the mention of Twin Pines Ranch made it unmistakable to anyone familiar. Luke didn't confront Isaac at first. He didn't have to. The change in him was immediate. Cold, professional, distant in a way that made Isaac feel more exposed than if they'd been yelling. The other ranch hands picked up on the shift too. Conversation quieted when Isaac entered a room, laughter stiffened. And work assignments came without the usual camaraderie. Stephen, ever perceptive, called Isaac into his office one afternoon. "I don't care what your article says," he said plainly, "but Luke's built a life here on being trusted. That trust is thin out here, and once it's gone for good." Isaac's throat tightened. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't finished." "That may be," Stephen replied gently, "but sometimes the harm doesn't wait for your intentions to catch up." That night, Isaac found Luke in the barn alone, brushing down a mare with methodical precision. He didn't look up. "You should pack," he said quietly, "before this place swallows you whole." Isaac didn't pack. Not right away. He spent the next day moving through the ranch like a ghost, completing tasks with mechanical precision, avoiding Luke's eyes and the quiet judgment of the others. But as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the cold crept in through the walls, he knew he couldn't leave like this, with everything fractured, unresolved. That evening, after dinner had been cleared and the bunkhouse had gone quiet, he made his way back to the calving barn where the storm had first cracked them open. Luke was there, as Isaac somehow knew he would be, sitting alone near a heat lamp, the golden light catching on the curve of his jaw, his expression unreadable. "I should be gone by now," Isaac said softly. Luke didn't move. "Then why aren't you?" Isaac stepped closer, heart pounding. "Because I don't want to leave. Not without you knowing that what happened between us wasn't just a story to me." Luke looked up then, eyes shadowed but raw. "It was never just a story," he said. "That's the damn problem." Without another word, Isaac crossed the final few steps, reached for him. And this time, Luke didn't pull away. Their mouths met in a kiss that was quiet, aching, and full of everything they hadn't said. It was a kiss that asked for forgiveness, for understanding, for one last chance. When they parted, Luke rested his forehead against Isaac's. "Stay tonight," he whispered. "Let's just be real. No noise, no world. Just us. The night stretched around them like a cocoon, warm and quiet beneath the corrugated roof of the calving barn. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside, everything was still. Luke sat beside Isaac on a stack of folded tarps, boots off, sleeves rolled, his expression softer than Isaac had ever seen it. Their shoulders brushed, then stayed there, unmoving, deliberate. I've spent years building this life, Luke murmured, eyes fixed on the floor. Stone by stone, rule by rule. Keep your head down. Keep your business private. Don't give anyone reason to talk. Isaac looked at him, heart catching on the rawness in his voice. And did it make you happy? Luke let out a slow breath. Safe, maybe. Not happy. A pause stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Isaac leaned in, brushing a kiss against Luke's jaw. Gentle, grounding. Luke turned to him, meeting his mouth again with more urgency this time. Hands finding the familiar shape of Isaac's waist. There was no rush, no fumbling, just the quiet exploration of what had long been denied. Later, wrapped in a warm blanket and lying side by side on the hay-strewn floor, Isaac traced circles on Luke's chest with his fingers. You don't have to choose between this place and me, he said quietly. We just have to be brave enough to figure out what's possible. Luke closed his eyes, a slow smile curving his lips. Then let's start now, before the sun comes back and the world starts watching again. The morning light filtered in slow and golden, casting long slats across the barn floor where Isaac and Luke still lay tangled in the quiet aftermath of something that felt like both a beginning and an ending. There was no rush to move, only the soft shuffle of cattle in nearby stalls and the distant clank of a gate. For the first time since Isaac had arrived at Twin Pines, he didn't feel like a visitor. He felt anchored, even if the rope was frayed. But reality, as always, waited outside the barn door. By afternoon, word of the leaked article had reached local ears. Nothing scandalous in the text itself. No names. No locations, but the subtext was enough. Whispers grew in the bunkhouse. Questions passed in low voices, and glances lingered longer than they used to. Isaac tried to keep his head down, working harder than ever, but he could feel the shift. The way hands once quick to joke now held him at arm's length. Still he stayed, not because of stubbornness, but because walking away would mean forfeiting something that had finally begun to bloom. That evening, Stephen found him in the equipment shed, oiling tack in near darkness. Ranch life's full of weather, he said, leaning on the doorframe. Some storms come from the outside, and some we bring ourselves. You've done both. Now it's about what you do next. Isaac looked up, hands steady. I'm not done here. Not yet. And deep down, he hoped neither was Luke. Isaac didn't leave with fanfare. There was no dramatic goodbye. No tearful promises under the open sky. Instead, there was a quiet morning, bags packed neatly in the back of his rental, the ranch still waking as he prepared to drive east. Luke stood beside him in the gravel drive, posture straight, but eyes soft, arms crossed like he was holding himself together. I'll call when I get back, Isaac said, his voice low. Once things settle. Luke nodded but didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the collar of Isaac's jacket, fingers brushing against his neck for just a second too long. A silent memory, a private anchor. You take care of yourself out there, Luke finally said. City's got a way of chewing people up. Isaac offered a crooked smile. Then I'll spit back harder. He got in the car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. Luke stepped back, raising a hand in farewell. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a goodbye either. As Isaac pulled onto the dirt road, he looked once in the rear view. Luke was still there, framed by the land he'd never leave, waiting, just maybe, for him to come back.